The room froze when the paper slipped from the executor's hand. Not fell. Slipped, slowly, deliberately, like the air itself had thickened around it. Across the long table, chairs scraped back. Someone inhaled sharply. Someone else laughed once, too loud, then stopped. The document lay half open on the polished wood, its edges trembling from the movement of the room. "This isn't possible," a voice said. The executor did not look up. He stared at the page as if it had just changed in front of him, as if the words he had already read no longer meant what they meant seconds ago. At the far end of the table, a woman's fingers tightened around her phone. Her knuckles went white. She didn't check the screen. She didn't need to. Whatever she had been waiting for was already happening. The will had been read. Everyone in the room knew that. The instructions were clear. The signatures were confirmed. The witnesses were dead or unreachable. The estate, vast, complex, and fought over long before this morning, had already been divided in their minds. They had come for confirmation, not surprises. The executor cleared his throat. The sound was thin, strained. He adjusted his glasses with one hand and pressed the other flat against the table, anchoring himself. "There is," he began, then stopped. Silence stretched. It wasn't polite silence. It was sharp, expectant, almost aggressive. "There is an addendum," he said. The word landed wrong. Not like a legal term. Like a threat. Chairs shifted again. A man near the window leaned forward, his smile gone. Another crossed his arms, jaw tight, already preparing an argument. Someone muttered that this was a waste of time. Someone else whispered, "I told you." The executor finally looked up. His eyes didn't settle on the loudest person, or the most confident. They moved past them, scanning the room, as if counting exits, as if measuring how much damage the next sentence might cause. "This addendum," he said carefully, "was sealed." That word changed everything. Sealed meant hidden. Sealed meant intentional. Sealed meant the person who wrote the will had expected resistance, had anticipated exactly this room, exactly these faces. A sharp voice cut through the tension. "Sealed by who?" The executor hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Long enough for everyone to notice. "By the testator," he said. The woman with the phone looked up then. Her expression didn't change, but her breathing did. Slow. Controlled. Like someone bracing for impact. The executor picked up the paper again. His hands were steady now, but his shoulders were not. The weight of the room pressed into him. Years of planning, money, and quiet threats hovered just beneath the surface. "I was instructed," he continued, "to read this only after the will was accepted as final." A bitter laugh came from somewhere to the left. "And it has been." "Yes," the executor said, "which is why this applies." He unfolded the page completely. The sound of paper echoed, too, loudly. "This addendum alters the distribution of the estate," he said. The reaction was instant. Voices overlapped. Accusations flew before anyone had time to think. Someone stood up. Someone else slammed a palm against the table. The room fractured into movement and noise, fear dressed up as outrage. The executor did not raise his voice. "It alters it," he repeated, "based on a condition that was not previously disclosed." That stopped them. Conditions meant leverage. Conditions meant someone had known something, something that hadn't been shared, something that could invalidate years of certainty. The man by the window sat back down slowly, eyes narrowed. "What condition?" he asked. The executor glanced down at the page again. His jaw tightened. "Compliance," he said. No one spoke. "Compliance with a private instruction," he continued. "That was fulfilled 3 days ago." The woman's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the floor. No one bent to pick it up. 3 days ago. The timing rippled through the room. Silent calculations racing behind eyes that refused to meet each other's gaze. Calls made. Meetings missed. Doors opened that shouldn't have been. Someone whispered a name. The executor shook his head. The addendum does not name the individual directly. A wave of disbelief rolled through the room. "Then how do we know it's valid?" "Because," the executor said, and now his voice hardened, "the instruction included a verification mechanism." One only I was authorized to confirm. He paused. Not for drama. For certainty. I have confirmed it. The room tipped into something darker. This was no longer about money alone. It was about control, about who had been seen, who had been trusted, and who had been quietly outmaneuvered. The executor drew a breath. As a result, he said, the primary beneficiary is no longer. Stop, someone snapped. Too late. The executor looked up, eyes locking onto a face no one else was watching. Not the loudest, not the angriest. The one who had said nothing since the beginning. The primary beneficiary, he finished, has changed. A chair creaked as someone leaned forward. And who, the man by the window asked slowly, is that? The executor's mouth opened, then closed again. His gaze flicked once more to the silent figure at the table's edge. And the question hung there, heavy and unanswered. Who had just inherited everything, and why had no one seen it coming? The silence didn't last. A door opened at the back of the room, just enough to let in a draft, just enough to remind everyone this wasn't a sealed box. This was a place with exits, with witnesses, with consequences. The executor lowered the paper, but did not sit. We will continue, he said, as if control had not already slipped from his hands. The person at the edge of the table finally moved. Not abruptly, not defensively. A simple adjustment of posture. One foot slid back beneath the chair. Fingers folded together, calm to the point of being unsettling. Most of them noticed too late. This person had arrived early, had chosen the least important seat, had spoken to no one. No arguments, no alliances, no visible expectations. They had mistaken quiet for irrelevance. The executor addressed the room, but his eyes returned there again and again. The addendum specifies that the revised beneficiary must be present at the reading, he said, and must hear the terms in full. A sharp inhale came from the far end. You're saying one of us didn't know they were playing a different game? No, the executor replied. I'm saying one of you did. The person at the edge of the table looked down at their hands. There was a faint tremor there. Not fear. Restraint. Something held back for too long. They had not planned to speak today. They had planned to leave quietly, to return to a life that had never intersected with this room, these people, this fortune. That plan was already dead. The executor turned another page. The instruction, he said, was simple in wording, but severe in implication. A man scoffed. Everything about this is severe. The instruction, the executor continued, required a single action. One that could not be delegated. One that could not be undone. Eyes darted around the table. Suspicion spread like a stain. What action? Someone demanded. The executor did not answer immediately. He looked again at the quiet figure. A question passed silently between them. Permission, perhaps. Or warning. The figure gave a small nod, barely visible. The action, the executor said, was to confront a truth this family refused to acknowledge. The room reacted badly to that. Someone laughed. Someone cursed under their breath. A woman stood and began pacing behind her chair, heels striking the floor in sharp, rhythmic taps. Enough riddles, she said. Say what this is about. The executor's voice tightened. It is about responsibility. The quiet figure's jaw clenched. A memory surfaced uninvited. A closed door. A voicemail never returned. A signature denied because it was inconvenient. They had learned early that responsibility was a word people liked to use when they wanted something from you, not when you needed something from them. The testator, the executor said, anticipated refusal, denial, delay. He paused, then added he was correct. The pacing woman stopped. You're accusing us? I'm reading, the executor replied. He lifted his eyes again. 3 days ago, the instruction was fulfilled. A man leaned forward. By who? The executor didn't answer. Instead, he read on. The person who fulfilled it did so privately, without witnesses, without leverage, without any promise of reward. The quiet figure swallowed. They remembered the room they had stood in 3 days ago. Smaller than this one. Dimmer. The air heavy with something unspoken. A person sitting across from them who had not expected to see them ever again. A truth spoken out loud, finally. Not shouted. Not weaponized. Just stated. It had cost them more than anyone in this room could imagine. The addendum states, the executor continued, that this action demonstrated the only qualification the testator considered relevant. Someone slammed a fist on the table. This is insane. There were criteria, experience, bloodlines. The executor did not flinch, none of which are mentioned here. He turned the page again. The revised beneficiary is described only as the one who did not look away. The words hit the quiet figure like a physical blow. They hadn't known those words existed. Hadn't known they had been seen. Their breathing shallow. They kept their gaze fixed on the table. They could feel it now, the attention shifting. Curious glances. Narrowed eyes. People scanning faces, replaying interactions, recalculating who had disappeared 3 days ago, who had made an unexplained visit, who had gone quiet afterward. The man by the window spoke carefully. And what happens to the rest of us? The executor's answer was immediate. The original distributions remain in place. Relief flickered across several faces, quickly replaced by confusion. Except, the executor added, for controlling interest. That word cracked the room open again. Control meant decisions. Control meant access. Control meant power without needing permission. The quiet figure felt the weight settle fully now. This was not an inheritance. It was a transfer of gravity. You can't be serious, the pacing woman said. You're handing control to someone who wasn't even part of this. The executor met her stare. The addendum anticipates that objection. Of course it did. The testator wrote, the executor read, if they are not part of this, it is because you made sure they weren't. Silence swallowed the room whole. The quiet figure closed their eyes briefly. Images rose unbidden. Invitations never sent. Meetings rescheduled indefinitely. A life built on the outskirts of something they were never meant to touch. And yet here they were. A voice broke the silence, lower now. So what happens next? The executor folded the paper with care. Next, he said, I formally acknowledge the revised beneficiary. The quiet figure's head lifted before they could stop it. The executor's eyes locked onto theirs. And just as he opened his mouth to speak the confirmation aloud, the door at the back of the room swung open again, harder this time, interrupting the moment before it could land. The interruption shattered the fragile balance. 2 figures entered without apology. One moved quickly, scanning the room. The other closed the door behind them with deliberate force, the click of the latch echoing louder than it should have. Every head turned. The executor froze mid-breath. This meeting is private, someone snapped. It was, the newcomer replied, holding up a thin folder. Until it wasn't. The room erupted again. Questions collided. Accusations surfaced. The executor raised a hand, but it was ignored. The quiet figure at the edge of the table stayed seated. They recognized the folder. They had seen it 3 days ago. The newcomer stepped forward. We represent an interested party, they said. And we have reason to believe this addendum was triggered under false pretenses. The words landed like a challenge thrown onto the table. The executor recovered first. On what basis? The folder was placed down, slid across the polished surface, until it stopped inches from the executor's hand. On the basis that the so-called private instruction was manipulated. Eyes snapped toward the quiet figure. Not all at once. Not obviously. But enough. The quiet figure felt it immediately. The temperature of the room shifted. Curiosity sharpened into suspicion. The executor opened the folder. His eyes moved fast. Too fast. This document, he said slowly, was not submitted through proper channels. It didn't need to be, the newcomer replied. It predates the will. That changed things. Predating the will meant context, meant motive, meant the possibility that the sealed addendum wasn't a reward, but a correction. The executor looked up. This suggests coercion. The quiet figure finally spoke. Just one sentence. Calm. Clear. It suggests fear. Every eye turned fully now. The sound of their voice seemed to rearrange the room. Not loud. Not commanding. Certain. You weren't there, the man by the window said quickly. You don't know what was discussed. I was there, the quiet figure replied. Just not invited to stay. Murmurs rippled. Someone scoffed. Someone else leaned back, reassessing. The newcomer seized the opening. 3 days ago, they said, a confrontation occurred. One that left the testator emotionally compromised. That's speculation, the executor said. No, the quiet figure said. That's avoidance. The pacing woman laughed sharply. This is unbelievable. You expect us to hand over control because of a private conversation no one can verify. The quiet figure met her gaze. You verified it by not denying it. The woman's smile faltered. The executor intervened. We are not here to litigate emotions. Then you're in the wrong room, the quiet figure said. The tension spiked. People shifted in their seats. Phones appeared, then disappeared again. No one wanted evidence of being present if this went badly. The man by the window stood. Let's be clear. You walk in here, say you didn't look away, and suddenly you own the future? That's not justice. That's sentiment. The quiet figure stood slowly. Not to dominate. To be seen. I didn't come here for ownership, they said. I came because I was asked to tell the truth. And I did. What truth? Someone demanded. The quiet figure hesitated. Not for effect. Because saying it aloud again still cost something. That the silence was intentional, they said. And that it hurt someone who trusted you. The room reacted unevenly. Some bristled. Some went still. The newcomer cleared their throat. There is another issue, they said. If control shifts, several pending decisions will be delayed. Which decisions? The executor asked. Divestments. Restructuring. Settlements? The newcomer replied. Deals that benefit current stakeholders. The quiet figure understood then. This wasn't about fairness. It was about timing. Those decisions were rushed, they said. And you know why? The pacing woman snapped. You're guessing. No, the quiet figure replied. I was warned. That drew the executor's attention sharply. Warned by whom? The quiet figure shook their head. That's not part of the instruction. A near reveal. Close enough to taste. Not enough to use. The man by the window laughed again, but it was hollow. So we're supposed to trust you because you're mysterious. No, the quiet figure said. You're supposed to be uncomfortable because you're exposed. The room tipped again. Someone cursed under their breath. Another person whispered urgently to the newcomer. The executor lifted both hands now. Enough. The addendum is valid unless overturned by evidence of fraud. The newcomer slid another document forward. Then consider this. The executor read. His face tightened. This alleges undue influence. It alleges desperation, the quiet figure corrected. The executor looked between them. If this proceeds, it will delay everything. That's the point, the man by the window said. Chaos favors no one. The quiet figure looked at him steadily. Chaos favors the truth when order is built on denial. A beat of silence. Thick. Pressurized. The pacing woman leaned forward. If you take control, she said quietly, you'll burn bridges you don't even know exist. The quiet figure answered just as quietly. They were already burned. I just stopped pretending they weren't. The executor closed the folder. We are approaching a threshold, he said. Once crossed, there is no reversal without public scrutiny. Public. That word made several people flinch. The newcomer hesitated now. Confidence slipping. You can't prove intent. I don't need to, the quiet figure said. Only impact. They reached into their bag and placed a small object on the table. Unassuming. Personal. A voicemail transcription. Dated. Time-stamped. Unsent. The executor read it. Slowly. The room held its breath. This, the executor said, voice strained, corroborates the instruction. The man by the window exploded. That's not admissible. It doesn't have to be, the executor replied. It was referenced. Referenced. Not explained. Not detailed. But enough. The pacing woman sank back into her chair. The newcomer gathered their papers, suddenly unsure. If you proceed, they warned, this will not end quietly. The quiet figure nodded. It was never quiet. The executor straightened. We will proceed. The man by the window whispered, you don't know what you're unleashing. The quiet figure looked around the table, at faces now stripped to certainty, of control, of unity. I do, they said. I've been living with it. The executor drew a breath. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere far away. Inside, everything leaned toward collapse. As executor, he said, I am prepared to finalize. A phone rang. Loud, sharp, wrong. Every head turned toward the sound. The pacing woman stared at her screen, color draining from her face. She answered without speaking, listened, then slowly lowered the phone. They know, she said. And in that moment, it became clear that whatever happened next would destroy what little was left. The room did not erupt this time. It sank. The word no settled into every corner, heavy and unavoidable. No one asked to. No one needed clarification. The meaning was clear enough to hurt. The executor was the first to move. Not away, forward, toward the center of the table, where every document now felt radioactive. Before anything else happens, he said, voice steady but stripped of warmth, there is something that must be stated on record. The quiet figure did not look surprised. They had expected this moment. Not the timing. The inevitability. The executor reached beneath the folder and removed a final page. Thicker, older, folded so many times the creases had softened. This, he said, was not part of the will, nor the addendum. Several people leaned forward instinctively. Others leaned back, as if distance could protect them. This, the executor continued, was delivered to me personally, with instructions not to open it unless the room arrived exactly here. A bitter laugh escaped someone near the window. You mean unless things went wrong? No, the executor said. Unless the truth became unavoidable. He unfolded the page. The paper was handwritten. Not hurried. Not angry. Precise. Controlled. The quiet figure recognized the handwriting instantly. Their chest tightened, but they did not interrupt. The testator wrote, the executor read. If you are reading this, then they try to stop it. A low murmur moved through the room. They will say it was manipulation, the executor continued. They will say I was confused, pressured, emotional. They will say anything except what matters. The executor paused, then read the next line slowly. I was not confused. Silence pressed in. I was finally clear. The pacing woman shook her head. This proves nothing. It proves intent, the executor replied. He read on. For years, I protected the version of events that benefited them. I called it stability. I called it discretion. I told myself silence was neutral. The quiet figure felt the words land like a confession they had already heard, face to face. It was not, the executor continued. It was a choice. The man by the window stood again, but his posture had changed. Less force, more fear. This is character testimony. It doesn't justify. It explains everything, the executor said. He turned the page. 3 days before my death, he read. Someone came to me with nothing to gain. I moved to the quiet figure now. Not accusing. Not yet. Something closer to recognition. They did not threaten. They did not negotiate. The executor continued. They did not ask me to fix anything. The quiet figure closed their eyes briefly. They told me the truth, the executor read. And then they left. The room was so quiet now that even breathing felt intrusive. The executor looked up. The instruction, he said, was not to reward loyalty, or courage, or morality. Then what? Someone asked, voice thin. To correct a lie, the executor replied. The quiet figure finally spoke again. He asked me one question. All eyes locked onto them. What question? The pacing woman asked. The quiet figure hesitated only a moment. He asked if I would still say it if nothing changed. The room reacted unevenly. Confusion for some, discomfort for others. And the man by the window demanded. I said yes, the quiet figure replied. The executor nodded. That answer is referenced here. He returned to the letter. That is how I knew, he read, that this was not revenge, or leverage, or ambition. The newcomer who had brought the folder shifted uncomfortably. Their earlier confidence had drained away. It was accountability, the executor read. And it terrified me. The pacing woman whispered. Why? The quiet figure answered. Because accountability requires change. The executor continued. I spent my life controlling outcomes, he read. I believed that made me responsible. It did not. Several faces hardened. Others softened. Old alliances began to crack silently. I cannot undo the damage, the executor read, but I can stop denying it. The executor folded the letter carefully and set it down. This, he said, is why the addendum exists. The man by the window exhaled sharply. So this was never about inheritance. No, the executor replied. It was about consequence. The quiet figure felt the weight of the room shift again. Not toward collapse this time. Toward clarity. You were never meant to be here, the pacing woman said, voice strained. The quiet figure met her gaze. Neither was the truth. A beat of silence followed. Then the newcomer spoke, quietly now. If this proceeds, several actions taken under previous authority will be re-examined. The executor nodded. Already scheduled. Faces drained of color. What actions? Someone asked. The executor did not answer immediately. He looked at the quiet figure instead. The testator anticipated resistance, he said. And escalation. He reached for the addendum again. Control, he read. Transfers immediately. With authority to pause, audit, and reverse any decision made to suppress or redirect responsibility. The room understood all at once. This was not a prize. It was a reckoning. The man by the window sat down slowly, as if the strength had left his legs. You planned this, he said quietly. Not to the executor. To the quiet figure. The quiet figure shook their head. I survived it. The executor straightened. The reveal is complete, he said. There will be no further clarification. He looked around the table, meeting each gaze in turn. What happens next, he said, is unavoidable. No one argued. No one interrupted. Because for the first time, the story made sense. And it was already too late to escape it. No one spoke when the executor finalized the transfer. There was no dramatic objection. No last attempt to stall. The room had reached a strange stillness, the kind that follows an earthquake when everyone is quietly counting what is left standing. The quiet figure remained on their feet. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Changed. The executor slid the final document across the table. Authority is now active, he said. Effective immediately. No applause. No acknowledgement. Just the sound of paper moving, and with it, the balance of power. The quiet figure did not touch the document right away. Instead, they looked around the table, meeting each gaze without hostility, without apology. I won't undo everything, they said. Only what was hidden. The pacing woman laughed once, bitter and tired. You think that makes you different? No, the quiet figure replied. I think pretending it didn't happen made us the same. That landed harder than any accusation. The newcomer gathered their things silently and left. There was no warning this time. No folder slammed on the table. Just retreat. One by one, the others followed. Some avoided eye contact. Some held it too long. A few hesitated, as if considering something they didn't yet know how to say. The man by the window was last. He paused at the door. You could have asked for more, he said quietly. The quiet figure shook their head. I already had enough. The door closed behind him. The room emptied. When it was finally quiet, the executor exhaled deeply and sat for the first time since the addendum was revealed. He looked older now. Lighter too. You know, he said, most people would have used this differently. The quiet figure picked up the document at last. Most people would have walked away. They signed nothing. They didn't need to. The authority was already theirs. Outside, the day moved on. Phones buzzed. Markets shifted. Conversations began without knowing why they felt different. Inside, the quiet figure stood alone for a moment longer. They thought of the question asked 3 days ago. If they would still speak the truth if nothing changed. Everything had changed. But not because they had demanded it. They folded the document carefully and placed it back on the table, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Then they turned and walked out. Not into silence. Into responsibility. And if this story made you pause, if it made you think about the moments when truth cost something, share what stood out to you. Some stories stay with us because they reflect choices we all face.